Okay, I'm going to move on to treatment studies now because that's really my main area. I'm just going to pause, Sylvia, and ask, I don't know if it's just me, I see other people shedding sweaters too. Is there any way to turn down the heat a little bit or open a door
I
or
can
window?
ask Greg, but that's...
Isn't it a little stuffy?
Open the back door.
If you can't, well, you might freeze people in back. Okay, thank you. So the last thing we need to really prove this causation, that nutrition or suboptimal nutrition is a cause of mental health problems, is to take people with mental health problems, give them extra nutrients, and see what happens. There have been only 2 studies that did that with overall diet from 2 different scientific groups, both in Australia, though not working together. Australia is a hotbed of nutritional research for probably a lot of things, but certainly in mental health. And in both of them, they were published in 2017. I haven't made a slide for Natalie Perletta's study yet. This is Felice Jacka's study. And it just shows it so well. They had 67 adults who'd been diagnosed with major depressive disorder, and they were randomized to one of 2 groups. Either they got diet counseling on how to improve their diet to eating whole foods and more of a Mediterranean type diet, or they got social support. Now we know that social support is going to help lots of people with depression, so it's not exactly a placebo, but I don't know how you do a placebo in that kind of design, but it is a good comparator. And so what they found, and it was only 7 sessions over 12 weeks, what they found was, well, this is worth noting. A lot of people say to me, I guess none of you is a psychiatrist probably, but they say, oh, depressed people can't change the way they eat. It's too much effort. They're so depressed they can't go out and learn how to cook more, eat properly, etc. Well, that's really not supported. That's a bias. And what these people showed was that even with depression, and these were seriously depressed people, diet modification was possible. They were able to learn and to put into action dietary improvements. And look at this result. If we had a new drug with no side effects, which eliminated the meeting criteria for depression in 1/3 of a sample in 12 weeks, it would be on the front cover of Time. But there is no publicity about this research. None that I know of, outside of, just people who are already interested in it, because it's nutrition. But 32% no longer met criteria for major depressive disorder. So obviously, we need to do something about dietary intake in people who are depressed and not depressed. Number needed to treat maybe is not something you're familiar with, but it's an interesting question. How many people do you have to put through a program like that to see significant improvement in just one? And it's only 4. That's quite low relative to a lot of medications. And the cost was no greater than eating fast food from restaurants. So none of these results are surprising if you know the history of research relating diet to mental health. And I told you about my online lecture, and I love talking about history, and today I gave myself one study that I thought I could show you, and here it comes. So, what do these characteristics resemble? The first one, you know what depression is? Hysteria is an old term, which probably the closest thing to it is mania, or mania with anxiety, agitation. Irritability, self-mutilation, now we call it self-harm, the kids who cut themselves. Apathy, social withdrawal, inability to concentrate, inattention, etc. Don't those sound like psychiatric symptoms that we have now at 20%, as I showed you? Well, in 1950, a group at the University of Minnesota took a group of healthy, all-male, undergraduate people and put them on a severe nutrient-deprived diet for 24 weeks. And this is what they got. Now, I want you to think about all the people who are displaced right now from their homes in war-torn areas. People who are displaced in the Fort Mac fires. People who are not getting adequate nutrition. And what do? We mobilize the mental health teams to diagnose and hand out more medication. That's what we do. Okay, that's my only history slide, folks, 1950. Recent history. So now, I told you about the SMILES trial, and there's one other one from Australia showing that we can do a lot, and we should do a lot by improving nutrient intake. But because my own career has been spent studying treatment with nutrients in pill form, I'm going to finish this section with a little bit of information in this area. I'm not saying that people should run out and buy pills. It's much better to improve your diet first. But anyway, a little thing on terminology, it has already slipped in. I use the term micronutrient. It's not a well-defined term. Some people use it to refer to minerals and vitamins. That's how I use it. Some people say it includes amino acids. Some people say it includes omega-3 fatty acids even. Anyway, micronutrients. But it's different from the macros like protein, fats, calories, that kind of thing. And then this little distinction I want to point out, there are a lot of multi-nutrient formulas like B complex. Do any of you take B complex? You've seen it in the stores? Yeah. And there are what, 3, 4, 5 nutrients in them? But then there are some broad spectrum formulas which have 25 or more micronutrients in them. And those are the ones that have been most studied for mental health problems. So, on this slide is, to the best of my knowledge, every formula, complex formula, multi-nutrient formula, broad spectrum formula, whatever you want to call them, every single one that's ever been studied in the entire world. It's not very much, is it? First, keep in mind that drug companies don't fund any of us, and so there is no funding. Okay? So doing research on these things is very challenging. Most of these are B complex, and some of them won't look familiar to you because they're European or Australian. The only two which are broad spectrum, meaning they have 24 or more, are these two, and they are actually developed in Alberta. Okay? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. One is called Empower Plus, and it's made by True Hope. And the other, True Hope, split in two about 6 years ago, and the Hardy family moved and set up their own company, Hardy Nutritionals, and they make a variation called DEN, Daily Essential Minerals. Now, I am an academic snob, a little bit, about certain things. I know that you can go into the store and you will see 100 formulas there. But I also know that no independent scientist has ever studied any of them for mental health. And so when people ask me what one they should be interested in, it's not that none of them are any good. I don't believe that. I think some of them are very good. But the only ones I've spent my life as a scientist, and the only ones for which we have scientific data are these two. Okay, and so that's what I'm going to talk to you about. Not because I'm promoting products, I'm not. It's because I want to give you the scientific data. For information about them, please go to their websites. They actually help people. How many of you have heard of these formulas? Oh my gosh, quite a few of you. Okay, then you know that they're not like any other company in the world that I know. Though both of these companies work with customers, clients, whatever you want to call yourselves. If they want to try the product for a symptom of any kind, they'll work with you. And you know, I meant to call them and ask if they'd ever worked with anybody with neuropathy, and I forgot. So, my bad, okay? I will find out at some point. Their formulas are being studied all over the world, Canada, New Zealand, USA, and now there's a big European study starting. And some of those people can't understand why Albertans aren't more excited about these formulas that were developed in Alberta, but there you go. I have a few more things related to disclaimers, and it might be a little redundant. I'll run through them. They never fund any of the scientists anywhere. They do provide free pills. Every company does that. That's not unique to them. Because of ethics committee requirements, though, we academics cannot do research on these things if they have not been reviewed by Health Canada and, for my American colleagues, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration. And so I think they are the only formulas in the world that have been reviewed and approved by FDA and Health Canada, simply because our research ethics boards require it. Okay, so let's talk about it. Now, there are more than 35 publications on the Alberta formulas. There are another 10 or 15 on the B complex. And some of you are already looking like you wish I would shut up. So I can't talk about all of that, okay? So what I've done is I've highlighted, I'm going to talk about stress. And then in the context of social issues, I'm going to give you a case study of a child with psychosis. I have slides here on ADHD and depression and bipolar disorder, but I don't think I should cover them. So I want you to close your eyes, and I'm going to skip past a bunch till I get to the stress ones. It's not a nice way to do it, but we had so many technical problems getting this set up. I didn't want to go out of my presentation mode to change it. So I want to talk about stress. Dr. Julia Ruckledge, do any of you know who she is? She's spoken in Calgary a couple times, okay. She is a Canadian, my former student actually, who ended up at the University of Calgary in Christchurch, New Zealand, where she's been for over 15 years. She now has the most active research program in the world on the Alberta formulas. So in 2010, she was in the middle of a clinical trial with people who had diagnosed, I don't even remember right now if they were ADHD, mood problems, something like that. And the earthquake struck in Christchurch. And because she was in the middle of evaluating, she wondered, when everybody kind of calmed down a little bit, what had happened to people. And she was able to locate about 15 people who were taking the active formula. Now in 2010, I'm sure it would have been a Power Plus because the company hadn't split then. So about 15 people who were taking Empower Plus, and she found about 15 people who, for whatever reason, had finished the study, left it, not continued, whatever, they were not taking it. But they had been part of the study, so she had lots of information about them and their mental health. And she compared those two groups of 15 and published the results, which is that those who were taking the formula at the time of the earthquake recovered in terms of their depression, anxiety, and stress much better. They were much calmer. They were able to cope. I didn't bring a slide on that, but I'm going to show you some slides related to it. Now, this is Christchurch area. They had many aftershocks. Some of them were very strong for many months. And then 5 months later, they had another major earthquake. And you might remember hearing about that one. It destroyed a third of the downtown. Many people died. And Julia and her team were now no longer working in the buildings at the university because they were cracked and they couldn't be there, so they were working on the lawn in tents. And they used social media to set up a randomized controlled trial. Now this is no longer with people with clinical problems, this is the general population. They simply asked the general population if they would volunteer for a study to see whether or not nutrition might be useful for helping them cope after this other major earthquake. And so they had 3 treatment groups. One group was randomly assigned to B-complex, one got Empower Plus at a low dose, and one got Empower Plus at a higher dose. And in a nutshell, what they found was, here's the control group. Blue is baseline, and yellow is after 4 weeks. The control group, no change at all. The group getting the B-complex, significantly less stress, and in fact, this is the lower percentage meeting criteria for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And same thing with people getting Empower Plus, both groups. And in fact, if you group together the people taking Empower Plus, prior to taking it, 66% met criteria for PTSD, and after 4 weeks and taking it, 19% did. I made a video, it's on my Facebook page for Nutrition and Mental Health. I sent it to Veterans Affairs in Canada. I said, don't you think we should be paying attention to improving nutrition for our Canadian soldiers who return and are suffering with stress, etc.? And they said, oh, would you like to present a poster at a meeting? I said, no, it's beyond a scientific meeting. It's time for policy change. I got nowhere. So then, June 2013, you all know what happened. And so we had the flood, and Julia Skyped me and said, Bonnie, you've got to contact Mayor Nenshi and tell him about our earthquake studies and hand out nutrients, either B complex or Power Plus or something. I knew that that wouldn't work. So, why do we know that, right? Okay, it's very hard. Anyway, I keep trying to, it's called knowledge translation. I'm very focused on it now. So we set up a study together. She still had all of the software set up for the data collection from the earthquake studies. I went out and recruited, adults, mostly from the High River area, no surprise there. They had to be medication free and they had to show evidence of elevated depression and or anxiety on one of the scales. We felt a placebo would be unethical. You remember how stressed everyone was. How could you recruit people for a placebo? So we did a 3-group design. They were randomized to get either a single nutrient, a few nutrients, or a broad spectrum. So that was what our question was. Single nutrient was a small amount of vitamin D, few nutrients B complex, which we knew should help some people, and then the broad spectrum. Now this is to remind me to say to you, we had a relatively well-nourished population, supported. I'm sure some of you were out, as I was, in my boots and my mask and my gloves, helping people shovel mud. They were well supported, and it was a single event. Christchurch had 8,000 earthquakes between the one in September and the one in February. They had a mass migration of, especially like the university students who didn't have family there, they wanted out of there. It was a very stressful time. Such a difference. I thought, how are we going to show an effect with a well-nourished, supported population and a single event? I didn't expect to find anything. This is what we found. This is published in Psychiatry Research. I couldn't get even the University of Calgary to mention it in their newsletter. They just don't want to know about nutrition. So this is the group that got vitamin D. And these are the groups that got B complex or broad spectrum. And interestingly, B complex is, this is a decrease in depression and anxiety and stress, okay? In 6 weeks. So these groups were the same. So B complex was just as good as the broad spectrum for stress in a basically healthy population. So guess what I did when the Fort Mac fires happened? I think all the people in the administrations know me, but if anyone has any ins, I am still beating my head against every brick wall I know of. I went to our SEMA, our emergency people. They said, this is a healthcare issue, you've got to go through healthcare. I knew I would end up with psychiatry. Psychiatry said, we're not interested. And then they said, well, we'll get the dietitians to look at it. And the dietitians said, we will add one sentence to our brochure recommending that people who are displaced try to eat well. And that's what they did. And so to this day, when there is a crisis in Alberta or anywhere that you care about, if you know of a way I'm quite serious about this, to reach people who might be interested even in recommending a B complex. It's cheap, it's easy. There are about 8 randomized controlled trials from European groups showing it helps cope with stress. Maybe that's of interest to some of you. We really need to get this word out, and I don't know why people are afraid of vitamins and minerals. Okay, so now we have 3 studies show the same thing. Humans are more resilient to stress when they're better nourished. And as a supplement, providing even just B complex results in major benefit for acute stress. But I put this note in here because I can't cover all the literature with you today. Trust me, please, it is not significant for someone with a real mood or anxiety disorder or explosive rage or something. I've never heard even anecdotal benefits of B complex for that kind of thing. That's where I put the Fort Mac fires. Okay. So take-home message, we eat for our brains. Optimal brain function requires a broad spectrum of minerals and vitamins for metabolism. And we should all care about people who are under stress. We should be doing a lot of things about improving our eating habits. So I've spoken for about 40 or 45 minutes. I'd like to, maybe I'll raise one of the societal issues, okay? And then I'd like to open it for discussion. I will tell you about my one case with neuropathy. It's just an acquaintance, but I'd like to tell you about him. And maybe you can teach me some things. So I'm going to talk about the money issue here. I won't talk about the food supply issue today. This is from the Canadian Mental Health Commission. This shows the cost of conventional mental health treatment. Now, only this data point is real. The others are projections based on, what's been coming before it, and the fact that so many people are now being diagnosed and treated with medication. So I'd say we have a financial issue here. So I'm going to tell you about Andrew, and if any of you have heard me talk before, and I know at least one of you has, you know Andrew because I often tell this case. It's, I think, speaks at many levels to the importance of nutrition. Andrew, at the age of 10, was becoming so stressed and overwhelmed. He had trouble with sleep and concentration. And then he started having hallucinations, both auditory and visual. He had paranoid ideation, and he developed delusions at the age of 10. He thought he had killed someone, and he thought he had committed adultery, and I don't think he knew what that was. But he felt so guilty, he had to pray obsessively, and so with his anxiety and his obsessive prayer, he was diagnosed with OCD. He became an inpatient at Children's Hospital here. For 6 months, he was described to me as the sickest child they had ever had. And they tried every first they went through all the usual thing about pandas and immunologic problems, etc. Nothing was there. And they tried many medication trials, and nothing helped him. He came into the hospital at the age of 10 with a general adaptation score. The scale doesn't matter, but out of 100, he was functioning at a 35. That's very low. After 6 months, he was functioning at 35. They could do nothing for him, and so they sent him home. And he was turned over to outpatient mental health. So they went to see the outpatient psychiatrist, who was the head of the Mood and Anxiety Disorders Clinic at the time. Her name is Dr. Megan Rodway. And his parents had heard about this True Hope formula. So they said to Dr. Rodway, should we try it? And to Dr. Rodway's credit, she said, well, I think it's snake oil, but I don't have anything better to offer. So she said, I'll support you while you do that. Now, I didn't know the family, but I was called in to help with the data. And so now I'm going to show you what happened to Andrew. By now he had turned 11, and he went on to the Empower Plus formula. This is his daily psychosis symptom score going down to 0. The red line is just a data smoothing method. These are his hallucinations. The blue ones are visual, the red ones are auditory, going down to 0. And by 2010, and still now, he had no psychotic symptoms. He has to take the formula. He one summer when he was a teenager said, I'm tired of taking this, and scared the pants off of himself and his parents when the hallucinations started to come back. So he has an inherited need, probably, for an unusually high amount of micronutrients for proper brain metabolism. So he has no psychotic symptoms, has to take the formula. He graduated high school in 2015, which is miraculous for childhood psychosis. But he does still have anxiety. Anxiety in some ways is the hardest symptom to totally get rid of. And he's coping with breathing, exercises, and meditation and so forth. But this is why I'm showing you. Remember, I was talking about money. We called in a health economist who pulled the data on what it cost him to treat him for 6 months at Children's Hospital, and then what it cost to treat him with micronutrients for the immediate following 6 months. And as you can see, we saved 98% of the healthcare budget on that one patient. And so then last year, we duplicated that. I'm not going to show you all the data, with an adult who came to me and said, Bonnie, I think I cost the province of Ontario $1 million before I got onto these nutrients. And so I contacted some health economists I know in Ontario, and we did a study, and we were able to show that indeed, when she went from being treated conventionally to being treated with micronutrients, we saved a lot of money for the healthcare budget. And in fact, it costs less than 10%. But of course, the nutrients are not covered by any healthcare plan. The families are supporting them. But think about what our societies could do by saving money. I'm not saying that not everyone gets better, not everyone benefits. And this is not magic. It's just that isn't it worth trying because some people are helped and it's going to save our budget. Now I'm going to skip over the nutrient density. My voice is almost gone. And I'll end with, my hopeful message. Suboptimal nutrition, meaning not perfect for you. What's perfect for you is not perfect for you, is not perfect for you, is not perfect for me. We're all individual, we know that. And it's a modifiable risk factor, so shouldn't we be looking at it? My vision of the future is every clinician will say, and I don't mean just mental health clinician, even your family doctors who, if they're talking to a patient who says, I've been feeling down or anxious, they should say, you know, there's an increasing amount of evidence that how we eat affects how we feel. Let's talk about your diet. And you don't have to be a dietitian to talk about the difference between processed food and whole foods. Every mental health clinic will not just talk about it, but will teach cooking and will educate about nutrition and mental health. And this is my real goal in life, is that every child who has a developing brain will have the opportunity of being given a broad spectrum micronutrient formula before they are ever exposed to these medications, which have side effects. Next week I'm talking, I hope I'm talking, or croaking to about 100 people from businesses here in Calgary about workplace mental health. And I want to talk to them about creating a culture of health. Why do people bring in trays of Timbits and donuts, you know? And so on about consumer health. Now, this is how to reach me. You can request my slides. You can join. About twice a year I send out an email update about nutrition and mental health. I have raised over $500,000 and I'm funding 3 clinical trials and from charitable funds. These are not my clinical trials. As you know from the introduction, I'm retired. I'm emeritus now. I'm not starting any new research. But I have junior colleagues all over the world who cannot get their research funded because that's the way it is. And so I'm funding right now parts of 3 different clinical trials, parts of 1 in New Zealand, and then whole clinical trials in North America. So I'm always looking for donors. Here, my charitable fund is managed by the Calgary Foundation. But if you have questions about the formulas, I had to name names, and I'm never comfortable doing it, but I don't know how to talk about this research without naming them. But don't ask me. Go to the companies. They're delighted to talk to you. Go look at their websites, okay? So maybe I'll leave that up, and then leave it up, and then I'll tell you about my one experience with neuropathy. So almost exactly a year ago, what else is here? Oh, I have to click with this, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, we have a very strange computer situation here, don't we? I'm just going to go through it this way. About a year ago, I met a man who is a physician who has neuropathy, and it's affecting his balance and so forth because it's in his feet. I don't recall if he said if he had any in his hands or not. I think he did. And he also had terrible foot cramps, leg cramps, that would wake him up at night. How many of you, is that part of?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I'll tell you what's happened. So we were talking, as I said, he's retired, but he's very, very active. He's a big, strapping guy and very active and does woodworking, and I worry about his hands with the saw and everything. But anyway, he says he's careful. I did it again. Can you come up and just put up my email address so I can talk at the same time? I even when I talk to people on the phone, I say I can't talk and click at the same time. And I just proved it to all of you. The very last slide. Yeah. So he was telling me about the leg cramps, and they were very troubling because disturbed sleep is a huge problem. And he said, I've tried magnesium, which I guess a lot of you have tried. And he said it really didn't do much. And I asked him about the dose. Now, this is a physician. He knows the role of magnesium in muscle cramps. And I said, well, I don't know. I don't like to talk about single nutrients. I know that in the brain, you don't fix anything much, usually with a single nutrient. It takes a group in balance. So he said, I'd like to try one of the formulas you've been studying. And I said, well, fine, but I have no idea if it's going to help you. Well, when I knew that Sylvia wanted me to come speak to this group, I thought I'd better check back with him and ask him what happened. And he said, well, I have no more leg cramps. They are gone, and I'm certain it's the formula, but it has not touched my neuropathy and my balance, and he's walking with a cane now. But he said, I'm still at a relatively low dose, and I'm going to be seeing my doctor. I guess it would be a neurologist he'd be going to in March or April, and they do the tests they do for sensory neural activity, and they're going to be doing that. And if it shows even a smidgen of improvement, I will increase my dose and see if I can make a dent on the neuropathy. So that's the story. I didn't really know that leg cramps were associated with neuropathy. It's worth a try. I think he was taking 4 a day. I should say something about the dose of these. You can't think about these like medication. If you're taking a multivitamin, you take 1, okay? But if you're taking a multi-mineral, there's no way minerals can fit into 1 pill. Think of the Rocky Mountains. Women, think of your calcium pills and multiply that by 15 minerals. You can't fit it into 1 capsule. And so people who are taking these broad spectrum formulas are taking anywhere from 4 to 12 a day, spread out over the day usually, and always on a full stomach after meals. So he was, I think, at 4 a day to get rid of his leg cramps, and he might go increase, okay? And if any of you does that, I hope you'll let me know what happens.